Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, joined today by one of our online columnists, Mac Loftin, who has written a piece for us called The Blasphemy of National Christianity. So we're going to talk about that, but before we do, hello, Mac. How are you doing? And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey John, I'm doing good. So I'm Mac Loftin. I am the lecturer on theology at Harvard University. And what else about me? I have a book coming out in November from Orbis Books called In the Twilight of the Christian West. That I think if people like this column, like this kind of theological critique of right-wing politics, then you will like the book. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, I'll just mention now before we get started that anyone out there, you can find some links in the video description below, the link to the article we're about to discuss, and the link to pre-order Mac's book. Okay, so this essay, you start off talking about this idea of national Christianity being kind of a flip side of Christian nationalism. We hear a lot, we write a lot, we read a lot about white Christian nationalism. I think folks are very familiar with that idea, but you are introducing maybe an also very bad other side of the coin here. Can you tell us a little bit about this idea of national or nationalist Christianity?
Yeah, so it is sort of the clunky term that I came up with in this essay where I was trying to describe a tendency within people who either self-describe as Christian nationalists or who we think of as being Christian nationalists, this kind of other side of what that project entails. And so we think, like, when you hear the phrase Christian nationalism, you think, oh, these are people who want to make America a Christian nation, and they do want that. But there is increasingly among these right-wing Christian nationalist circles a sort of corollary to that idea, which is that it's not only that they want to make America a Christian nation, but that they also want to kind of carve up Christianity into distinct national types. They really want to insist on a kind of national essence that people have that Christian belonging doesn't overcome, but actually strengthens, such that there is some sort of essential difference between me as an American Christian and, say, a Palestinian Christian or a Chinese Christian or a Mexican Christian, that we kind of stay members of our nation, or we have this national essence that keeps us distinct from other national forms of Christianity. So I have been thinking about this in my mind. This term national Christianity is sort of how I've been making sense of this, of like a kind of a real pushback against a sort of universalist imaginary in Christianity, a pushback against the idea that these boundaries that we draw between ourselves are overcome or are diminished or ignored in Christianity. And they want to say, no, these actually, to be a Christian is to insist even harder on the difference between different national communities. And I think as I get to in this essay, I think that is a really, really awful theologically and really, really dangerous morally and politically idea. I think I say it in the essay. I think it is just a blasphemy that is creeping its way through Christianity in a lot of circles in ways that we might not expect. And I think we really need to just tear it out completely.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about maybe how that creep is happening.
Yeah.
Before we started recording, we talked. I told you I actually know somebody. I've known him for the last 20 years who's very much in this camp, not just a white Christian nationalist, but a national Christian as well.
Yeah.
You describe one of the hallmarks of this way of thinking is that ethnicity comes first. It kind of
Yeah.
supersedes all religious belonging, faith commitments. I'm curious, and I'm thinking of this guy I know, but just in general, if you have any ideas of how we got here, how do these folks get swept up, do you think, into this vision of nationalism, of national Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a theologian by training, and it's my job, and so I tend to think about these things in terms of like the history of ideas, like where did this idea come from, or resonances, in the history of theology does this idea have, and to kind of think about these like like how could someone intellectually justify to themselves this version of Christianity that I find really abhorrent. But I don't think that that is what's happening. I don't think that people are sitting around and thinking, huh, well, what is my take on the relationship between Christianity and national belonging? Or what do I think about like, what does baptism do to like imagined national differences or something? Like, this is not a position that I think people are coming to by being convinced of certain intellectual arguments. Um, I think so. Freud has this famous line where he says, "Where the id was, there the ego will be." And the idea is basically we don't have ideas, rational thoughts that then give rise to certain feelings. We have feelings, and then we come up with ideas to rationalize and to think about those feelings and to kind of make them make intellectual sense. And I think that that is what is happening here. I think for these national Christians, the id is moving first, and then the ego is coming up later with some justifications. I think that there's someone comes to this idea of Christianity by starting with disgust, by starting with repulsion, by starting with hostility to people who are different from themselves. And then the tomes about Christian nationalism and about, ethnic difference within Christianity, that all gets written later. But I think it is really you get to these ideas because there is something that you find just unbearable or unworkable about being in community with people who are different from you, people who you might find confusing, people with whom you might not get along very easily, people maybe who you don't like. People react against that, and then they come up with this idea, this fantasy of Christian belonging where you're around people who look like you and who talk like you and who think like you. And I think that that is just completely anathema to what Christianity is. Like what Christianity is, what it is to be a member of the body of Christ, is to be in community with people who you did not choose to be in community with, is to be sort of thrown into this community. You go to church on Sunday, you might not like the person next to you. You might not like the person reading the scriptures. You might not like the person giving the sermon. You might like them, but find them confusing or find certain parts of them alienating or something. But like you are thrown into a community with them and you have to find some way to get along with them. I think like that is a really important theological truth. Um, and that is a truth that I think is being really blasphemously denied by people who want to say no when you are an American, a white American, and you become a Christian, you retain some essence of white Americanness that makes you different from a Palestinian, and that is a barrier to you having some kind of relationship with that other person, that you are too fundamentally distinct to ever have a kind of close relationship. Like that's the vision of Christianity that they have. And I think to kind of get back to answering your question, I think it comes from just this visceral and unreflective and I think really like base and low kind of, oh, I just don't want to be around people who are different from me or who make me uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Near the end of the essay, you make the point that not only are these folks denying part of the truth of the Christian gospel message, they're also denying themselves the experience of liberation. You talk
Yeah.
about in the essay that when we're baptized into Jesus' death and resurrection, what could happen, what should happen is that we're liberated from the race and racism, the different things that we create to separate ourselves from others that ultimately take us captive. Like we are set free. I thought this was a really cool sort of ending to the essay, and I just wondered if you would tell us a little more about this idea of liberation that you were writing about.
Yeah, I think it is a liberation from a kind of like narrowness. I think I use the phrase narrowness of heart, this kind of narrow-mindedness. Um, that is people don't people don't want to be liberated from that because it's much more comfortable to be in it. But I think the experience of liberation actually opens you out to something much more beautiful. And what is happening there, I think, is that people we have kind of as a consequence of being sinful and fallen, we have a real desire to limit our circle of responsibility, to limit our circle of concern, to say, okay, well, I want to know who do I have to care about? Who do I need to concern myself with? Whose suffering do I need to be bothered by? And whose do I not have to worry about? Kind of where's the limit of that circle to where I no longer have to worry about someone and their suffering, their death. They don't have to bother me anymore so that I can stay kind of nice and unbothered. And I think that is one of the things that this project that I'm calling National Christianity is trying to do, is trying to draw that line and say, okay, you're a member of this national community. Well, the borders of that national community, that is where your moral responsibility comes to an end. So you don't have to worry about people beyond that. You get to kind of relieve yourself of the burden of caring about those people over there. Um, and like I'm thinking of the kind of liberative work of the cross and resurrection and baptism and sacramental life of Christianity is liberation from that narrowness, which is not always fun. Like it is not necessarily an enjoyable experience to have your circle of concern widened. That can often be a very painful experience because now all of a sudden you feel like you have to care about people who before you were comfortably unconcerned with. And now their suffering is bothering you. And so like that can be a really painful experience. I can see why people kind of shrink back from it. But I think it is liberation in the sense that it is a widening of the heart. It is a becoming more like who God is. That like the reason why we have these narrow spheres of concern is because we are limited and fallen creatures, but God's love is infinite and limitless, and God cares just as much for the person who I think is beyond my concern as God cares for me. And so by expanding my circle of concern, I am becoming more like that kind of love that God has, which is the work of salvation. I mean, to use these kind of like high-minded theological words, like the principle of salvation is like that God is making us more like God. And I think that what that means is that God is widening our sphere of concern to be more like God's own infinite sphere of concern. I don't think we can ever get there. I don't think we can ever actually have that infinite sphere of concern, but we don't get to relieve ourselves of the responsibility to have that. We don't get to say, well, I'm finite. My circle of concern is finite, and so be it. No, you're supposed to always reach out towards the people who you think you don't have to be concerned with. That you're always kind of being pulled out towards, okay, well, who is the person or what is the kind of person who I think that I can give my permission not to care about, give myself permission to not care about. And those are the people who you are being called out of yourself to be more concerned about, to be bothered by their suffering, to feel like you have some sort of moral responsibility to care for them just as much as you think people have a responsibility to care for yourself. So it's liberation, but it's not necessarily a comfortable posture of liberation. It's not liberation in the sense of, oh, I'm relieved of some burden. I'm being liberated from some burden that I had before. It's actually the opposite. Like to be liberated in this sense is actually to have a burden placed on you or to recognize that you already had a burden placed on you that you thought you didn't have before, that you found some way to ignore before, and you were liberated into seeing, oh no, this is how things actually stand. I actually am responsible for this person.
Mm, thank you for sharing that and for all your reflections today. I really appreciate them.
Yeah, thank
Anyone out
you.
there, I mentioned if you missed the essay, the link will be below, along with the link to Mac's book. Thanks so much for chatting today, Mac.
Yeah, thank you. This is great as always.